So the Trojans and Achaeans were left to carry on the grim struggle alone, and the battle kept swinging to and fro across the plain, with many a volley and counter-volley of bronze-headed spears, midway between Simois and the streams of Xanthus. Telamonian Ajax, bulwark of the Achaeans, was first to break a Trojan company and give his friends new hope when he struck the best fighter the Thracians had, Acamas, the tall and splendid son of Eusorus. Ajax let fly with his spear and hit this man on the ridge of his plumed helmet. The bronze point landed in his forehead, piercing the bone, and night came down on his eyes. Next, Diomedes of the loud war cry killed Axylus, son of Teuthranus, who came from the pleasant town of Arisbe. He was a wealthy man who lived well in his home by the roadside and had made himself popular by entertaining all comers. But none of his friends came forward now to tackle the enemy for him and save him from a dreadful end. Diomedes killed the pair of them, him and his squire Calesius, who was serving as his charioteer, and they both went down to the world below. Euryalus killed Dressus and Opheltius, and then sped after Aesepus and Pedasus, whom the water nymph Arborea had borne to the peerless Bucolion. Bucolion was the son of the haughty Laomedon, the first he had, the offspring of a secret love. He was shepherding his flocks when he met the nymph and lay in her loving arms. She conceived and bore twin sons to him. It was these that now fell to Euryalus, son of Mecisteus, who cut them off in their gallantry and strength, and stripped the armor from their shoulders. Astyanax fell to the steadfast Polypoetes, Paidetes of Percote to the bronze spear of Odysseus, and the noble Ereteon to Teucer. Antilochus, son of Nestor, killed Ablerus with a glittering lance, and Agamemnon, king of men, slew Elatus, who lived by the lovely waters of Satanois, in the hill town of Pedasus. The noble Latus killed Phylacus, who had taken to his heels, and Eurypylus dispatched Melanthius. Meanwhile, Menelaus of the loud war cry had captured Adrestus alive. This man's horses, bolting across the plain, had crashed into a tamarisk branch, snapped the shaft where it was fixed to the curved body of the chariot, and galloped off on their own towards the city, joining the rest in a wild stampede. Their master was tumbled out of the car, beside the wheel, flat on his face in the dust, and he soon had Menelaus, son of Atreus, standing over him with a long-shadowed spear in his hand. Adrestus threw his arms around Menelaus' knees and prayed to him.
My lord Atreidae, take me alive and you shall have an ample ransom. My father is rich and has plenty of treasure in this house, bronze and gold and raw iron. He will pay you a princely ransom if he heard that I have been taken alive to the Arcadian ships.
Thus he endeavored to soften his captor's heart. And indeed, Menelaus was just about to tell his squire to take him off to the Achaean ships, when Agamemnon came running up to remonstrate with his brother.
My dear Menelaus,
He said,
why are you so wary of taking men's lives? Did the Trojans treat you as handsomely as that when they stayed in your house? No, we are not going to leave a single one of them alive, down to the babies in their mother's wombs. Not even they must live. The whole people must be wiped out of existence, and none be left to think of them and shed a tear.
The justice of this made Menelaus change his mind. He thrust Adrestus from him with his hand, and King Agamemnon struck him in the flank. The man collapsed, and Agamemnon put his foot on his chest and withdrew his ashen spear from the wound. Nestor then called to the Argives in a loud voice.
Friends, Danaans, fellow soldiers, no looting now, no lingering behind to get back to the ships with the biggest share. Let us kill men! Afterwards, at your leisure, you can strip the corpses on the field.
This put new heart and daring into every man, and it looked as though the Trojans, defeated and disheartened, would be thrust back into Ilium by the victorious Achaeans. But at this juncture, Priam's son Helenus, the best augur in Troy, sought out Aeneas and Hector and appealed to them.
You too,
He said,
are in supreme command. We put you there because you have never failed us in the council chamber or in battle. Now prove us right. Make a stand here. Visit every part of the field yourselves and check the troops before they reach the gates and in their panic fall into their women's arms and make them enemy happy men. When you have rallied every company, we will stand our ground and fight the Danaans here. Exhausted we are. We have no choice in the matter. Meanwhile, Hector, go into the city and speak to our mother. Tell her to collect the older woman at the temple of bright-eyed Athene on the Acropolis and unlock the doors of the shrine. Let her choose a robe from her palace the loveliest and biggest she can find, and the one she values most herself, and lay it on the Lady Athene's knees, and let her promise to sacrifice in her temple 12 yearling heifers, untouched by the goad, if only she will have pity on the town and on the Trojans' wives and the little children, and keep the savage spearman Diomedes, the mighty panic maker, clear of holy Ilium, for he seems to have become most redoubtable foe. We never were so terrified, even of Achilles. Prince of fighters thought he was, and said to be a goddess' son. The fact is that Diomedes there has run amok, and not a man can hold him.
Hector acted promptly on his brother's advice. He leapt down from his chariot in all his armor, and swinging a pair of sharp spears in his hand, went everywhere among his men, urging them to stand and rousing their fighting spirit. As a result, the Trojans turned about and faced the Achaeans, who now gave ground and killed no more of the enemy. Indeed, the Trojans rallied to such effect that the Achaeans thought some god must have come down from the starry sky to help them. And there was Hector crying aloud to his troops,
"Gallant Trojans, glorious allies, be men, my friends, and fight with the courage you've always shown, while I go into Ilium and tell our elders and our wives to propitiate the gods and promise them a sacrifice."
With this, Hector of the flashing helmet went off towards the town. As he walked, the dark leather rim of his boss shield tapped him above and below, on the ankles and on the back of the neck. Glaucus, son of Apollocus, and Diomedes, son of Tydeus, now approached one another in the space between the two armies and offered battle. When they had come within range, Diomedes of the loud war cry challenged the other.
"Whom have we here?"
He asked.
"Give me your name, good sir, if indeed you are a man, for I have never seen you till this moment in the field of honor. Yet, in facing the long-shadowed spear in my hand, you have shown far greater daring than any of your friends. The fathers of men who meet me in my fury shall whimper in grief. But if you are one of the immortals, come down from the sky. I am not the man to fight against the gods of heaven. Why, not even the powerful Lycurgus, Dryas' son, survived his quarrel with the immortal ones for very long. He chased the nurses of the frenzied Dionysus through the holy hills of Nysa, and the staves dropped to the ground from the hands of one and all, while the murderous Lycurgus struck them down with his ox goad. Dionysus fled and found sanctuary under the salt sea waves, as Thetis took him into her bosom. He trembled and cowed under Lycurgus' merciless onslaught. But the immortals, easy livers as they are, resented what he had done. The son of Kronos struck him blind, and he did not live long after that, with all the deathless gods against him. So, you must not count on me if it comes to fighting with the Blessed Ones. But if you are one of us mortals who plow the earth for food, come, and you will meet your doom."
"My gallant lord Tydides,"
the noble son of Apollocus replied,
"what does my lineage matter to you? The wind blows and 1 year's leaves are scattered on the ground, but the trees burst into bud and put on fresh ones when the spring comes round. In the same way, one generation flourishes, and in another nears its end. But if you wish to hear about my family, I will tell you the tale. Most people know it already. There's a place called Ephyre, in a corner of Argos, where the horses graze. Here lived a man called Sisyphus, a cunning rogue as ever was. Aeolus was his father's name. Sisyphus had a son called Glaucus, and Glaucus, in his turn, was father of the incomparable Bellerophon. It was Bellerophon's misfortune to be subject to King Proteus, a far more powerful nobleman than himself, who fell foul of him and expelled him from the Argive state. Queen Antaea, Proteus' wife, had fallen in love with the handsome youth, who was endowed with every manly grace, and begged him to satisfy her passion in secret.
"Hey, baby."
But Bellerophon was a man of sound principles and refused. So Antaea went to King Proteus with a lying tale. "Proteus," she said, "Bellerophon has tried to ravish me. Kill him or die yourself." The king was enraged when he heard this infamous tale. He stopped short of putting Bellerophon to death. It was a thing that the king dared not do, but he packed him off to Lycia with a sinister message from himself. He gave him a folded tablet on which he had traced a number of symbols with a deadly meaning, and told him to hand this to his father-in-law. the Lycian king, and thus ensure his own death. Bellerophon's journey was sped by the gods in their own perfect way, and when he reached Lycia and the river Xanthus, he was welcomed as an honored guest by the king of those broad dominions. His hosts entertained him for 9 days and slaughtered 9 oxen for him. But the 10th day came, and then in the first rosy light of dawn, he examined him and asked to see what message he had brought him from his son-in-law, Protus. When he had deciphered the fatal letter from his son-in-law, the king's first step was to order Bellerophon to kill the monstrous Chimera, a creature whom the gods had foisted on mankind. She had a lion's head, a serpent's tail, and the body of a goat, and her breath came out in terrible blasts of burning flame. But Bellerophon let himself be guided by the gods, and succeeded in killing her. His second mission was to fight the famous Selimi. He spoke of that as the most terrific battle he had ever fought, and by way of a third, he killed the Amazons who go to war like men. But the king had thought of something fresh, and set a cunning trap to catch him on his return from this adventure. He picked our best men in all Lycia and stationed them in ambush. Not one of them came home. The incomparable Bellerophon killed them all. In the end, the king realized that he was a true son of the gods. He pressed him to stay in Lycia, offered him his daughter's hand, and gave him half his kingdom, while the Lycians also made him the grant of splendid estate, with plenty of vineyards and cornfields for his private use. The princess bore 3 children to the doughty Bellerophon, Isander, Hippolochus, and Laodamia, who then slept with Zeus, the counselor, and became the mother of Prince Sarpedon, of the bronze male. But the time came when Bellerophon incurred the enmity of all gods, and wandered off in solitude across the Ilian plain, eating his heart out, and avoiding all contact with men. Ares, the insatiable war god, had killed his son Isander in battle with the famous Selimi, and Artemis of the golden reins had slain Laodamia in anger. There remained Hippolochus, and I am his son.
Glaucus' tale delighted Diomedes of the loud war cry. He stuck his spear into the fruitful earth, and now addressed the Lycian prince in cordial terms.
Surely,
He said,
your family and mine are intertwined by harmony and fellowship. Aeneas, my noble grandfather, once entertained the peerless Bellerophon in his palace for 20 days, after which they exchanged splendid gifts as host and guest would. Aeneas gave his friend a belt stained with bright purple dye, and Bellerophon gave Aeneas a gold 2-handled cup, which I gazed upon as I set out. As for my father Tydeus, I don't remember him, as I was only a baby when he joined the Achaean expedition that came to disaster at Thebes. But I have said enough to show that in me you will have a good friend in the heart of Argos, and I shall have you in Lycia if I ever visit. So let us avoid each other's spears, even in melee, since there are plenty of Trojans and their famous allies for me to kill, if I have the luck and the speed to catch them, and plenty of Achaeans for you to slaughter, if you can. And let us exchange our armor, so that everyone may know that our grandfather's friendship have made us friends this day.
With no more said, they leapt from their chariots, shook hands, and pledged each other. But Zeus, the son of Cronos, must have robbed Glaucus of his wits, for he exchanged with Diomedes golden armor for bronze, 100 oxen's worth for the value of 9. Meanwhile, Hector had reached the oak tree at the Scaean gate, and was at once besieged by Trojan wives and daughters asking about their sons and brothers, their husbands and their friends. Recommending them all to pray to the gods, he dismissed them, one after the other, but not before many of them had heard grievous news. Then he made his way to Priam's palace. This magnificent house was fronted with marble colonnades, and in the main building behind, there were 50 apartments of polished stone, adjoining each other, where Priam's sons slept with their wives. His daughters had separate quarters, on the other side of the courtyard, where 12 adjoining bedrooms had been built for them, of polished stone and well roofed in. Priam's sons-in-law slept with their loving wives in these. Hector was met in the palace by his gracious mother, who was coming in with Laodice, the most beautiful of her daughters.
Hector,
She cried, putting her hand in his.
why have you come here, my child, in the middle of a pitched battle? Is it true then that those abominable Achaeans are wearing us down and storming the city walls? And then the spirit moved you to come in and lift your hands in prayer to Zeus on the Acropolis. But wait a minute while I fetch you some mellow wine, so that you may first make a libation to Father Zeus and the other immortals, and then, if you like, enjoy a drink yourself. Wine is a great comfort to a weary man, and you must be exhausted after fighting so hard for your dear ones.
My lady mother, bring me no wine,
replied the great Hector of the glittering helmet.
Or you will rob me of the use of my legs and leave me feeble and unmanned. Nor should I care to offer sparkling wine to Zeus with unwashed hands. A man cannot pray to the son of Kronos, the lord of the black cloud, when he is bespattered with blood and filth. It is you who must pray. Collect the older ladies and go with offerings to the temple of Athene, the warrior. Take a robe, the loveliest and biggest you can find in the house, and the one you value most yourself, and lay it on the lady Athene's knees. Promise her to sacrifice in the shrine a dozen yearling heifers, untouched by the goad, if only she will have pity on the town and on the Trojans' wives and little children, and will keep the savage spearman Tydeus' son, the mighty panic maker, clear of sacred Ilium. Go then to Athene the warrior's shrine, while I go after Paris and order him out. Although I doubt whether he will listen to me, indeed, I wish the earth would open and swallow him up. The gods brought him to manhood only to be a thorn in the flesh for the Trojans and my royal father and his sons. If I could see him bound for Hades' hall, I should say good riddance to bad rubbish.
Hector's mother went into the palace and gave instructions to her maids. While these were going round the town to collect the older women, she went down to the scented storeroom where she kept her embroidered robes. They were the work of the Sidonian women, whom Prince Paris himself had shipped across the sea from Sidon, when he was on the cruise that had brought him home with highborn Helen. From her wardrobe, Hecuba picked out the longest and most richly decorated dress as a gift for Athene. It had lain underneath all the rest, and now glittered like a star. With this, she set out, and a number of the older ladies hurried along at her side. When they reached the temple of Athene in the Acropolis, the doors were opened for them by Theano of the lovely cheeks, daughter of Cisseus and the wife of Antenor the charioteer, who had been made priestess of Athene by the Trojans. With a loud cry in which all joined, the women lifted their hands to Athene, while Theano of the lovely cheeks took the robe, laid it on the knees of the lady goddess, and prayed to the daughter of almighty Zeus.
Lady Athene, mighty goddess, protectress of cities, break Diomedes' spear. Bring him crashing down in front of the Scaean gate, and we will sacrifice to you here and now in your shrine 12 yearling heifers that never felt the goad, if you take compassion on the city and the Trojans, wives and little children.
Thus Theano prayed, but for answer, Pallas Athene shook her head. While the women were praying to the daughter of almighty Zeus, Hector made his way to the splendid house where Paris lived. Paris had built this himself, with the best workmen to be found in the fertile land of Troy. They built it for him, complete with sleeping quarters, hall and courtyard, close to Priam in Hector's houses in the Acropolis. The royal Prince Hector stepped indoors. He was carrying a spear 11 cubits long. The bronze point glittered in front of him, and there was a gold ring round the top of the shaft. He found Paris in his bedroom, attending to his beautiful armor, his shield and cuirass, and examining his curved bow, while Argive Helen sat beside him, with her ladies-in-waiting, and superintended their fancy work. Directly he saw Paris, Hector took him sharply to task.
Sir, you disgrace yourself by sulking like this,
he said,
while our men are falling in action round the town and at the very walls. It is your fault that the city is invaded by the sound of battle, and you would be the first to quarrel with anyone else whom you found shirking his duty in the field. Off with you now, before the town goes up in flames.
Hector, you have every right to rebuke me,
said Paris.
I admit it, but listen, I must explain that I am not sulking. I have no grudge against the Trojans, but came and sat down in my room to brood in my own humiliation. However, my wife has just been urging me, not without eloquence, to return to the front. And I think she's right, the same man does not always win. So give me a moment while I arm for battle, or else go on ahead, and I will follow. I can soon catch you up.
This speech drew no reply from Hector of the flashing helmet, whom Helen now made a gracious effort to placate.
Brother,
she said,
I am indeed a shameless, evil-minded, and abominable creature. Ah, how I wish that on the very day my mother bore me the storm fiend had swept me off into the mountains, or the roaring sea, and the waves had overwhelmed me before all this could happen. And next to that, since the gods have ordained things to this evil end, I wish I had found a better husband, one with some feeling for the reproaches and contempt of his fellow men. But as it is, this husband I God is an inconstant creature, and he will never change, though one day he will suffer for it if I am not mistaken. However, come in now, my dear brother, and sit down on this chair. No one in Troy has a greater burden to bear than you, all through my own shame and the wickedness of Paris, ill-starred couple that we are, tormented by heaven to figure in the songs of people yet unborn.
Helen, you are kind,
said the great Hector of the flashing helmet.
but do not ask me to sit down. I can only refuse, for I am late already and anxious to return to help the Trojans, who miss me terribly when I am gone. What you can do is to speed this fellow up, and he had better look sharp himself. Then he could catch me up before I leave the town, since I intend to look in at my own house, to see my servants and my wife and little boy, for I cannot tell whether I shall ever come back to them again, or am doomed to fall to the Athenians this very day.
With this, Hector of the glittering helmet took his leave and soon reached his own well-built house. But he did not find his white-armed wife Andromache at home. She had climbed up on the city wall with her child and a lady attendant, and was standing there in tears and misery. Failing to find his good wife in the house, Hector went to the threshold to make inquiries of the maidservants.
Maids,
He said,
tell me what has happened. Where has the lady Andromache disappeared to from the house? Is she visiting one of my sisters or my noble brother's wives? Or has she gone to Athene's shrine, where the rest of the Trojan ladies are interceding with the august goddess?
Hector,
said one of his busy maids,
since you want to know the truth, she is not visiting your sisters or your noble brother's wives. She has not gone to Athene's shrine with the rest of the ladies to pray to the august goddess. She has climbed the great tower of Ilium. She had heard that our men were being worn down and that the Achaeans had won a great victory. So she rushed off to the walls, like one distraught, and the nurse followed her with the baby in her arms.
When Hector heard this, he rushed from the house and retraced his steps down the well-built streets. He had crossed the great city and had reached the Scaean gate, by which he had meant to go out onto the plain, when Andromache herself, his richly dowered wife, came running up to meet him. Andromache was the daughter of the great-hearted Aetion, the Cilician king, who lived below the wooded hill of Glaucus, in Thebe under Glaucus. She came to meet her bronze-clad husband with a maid carrying a little boy in her arms, their baby son, and Hector's darling, lovely as a star, whom Hector called Scamandrius, but the rest, Astyanax, because his father was the one defense of Ilium. Hector looked at his son and smiled, but said nothing. Andromache, bursting into tears, went up to him and put her hand in his.
Hector,
She said,
you are possessed. This bravery of yours will be your end. You do not think of your little boy or your unhappy wife, whom you will make a widow soon. Someday, the Achaeans are bound to kill you in a mass attack. And when I lose you, I might as well be dead. There will be no comfort left when you have met your doom, nothing but grief. I have no father, no mother now. My father fell to the great Achilles when he sacked our lovely town, Caesarean Thebe, of the high gates. But though Achilles killed Asian, he was too chivalrous to despoil him. He burned him in his decorated arms and built a mound above him. And the modern nymphs, daughter of aegis-bearing Zeus, planted arms around it. I had 7 brothers too at home. In one day, all of them went down to Hades' house. The great Achilles of the swift feet killed them all, among the trembling cattle and their white sheep. As for my mother, who was the queen in Thebe under the woods of Brigus, Achilles brought her here with a race of spoils, but freed her for the princely ransom, and she was killed by Artemis in her father's house. So you, Hector, are father and mother and brother to me, as well as my beloved husband. Have pity on me now. Stay here on the tower, and do not make your boy an orphan and your wife a widow. Rally the Trojans by the victory there, where the war is easiest to scale and the town most open to attack. 3 times already, their best men, under the 2 Ajax and the famous Idomeneus and Atreidae and the formidable Diomedes, have assaulted that point and tried to back in. Someone who knows the oracles must have told them its history. or else they have their own reasons for attacking there.
All that, my dear,
said the great Hector of the glittering helmet,
is surely my concern. But if I hid myself like a coward and refused to fight, I could never face the Trojans and the Trojan ladies in their trailing gowns. Besides, it would go against the grain, for I have trained myself always, like a good soldier, to take my place in the front line and win glory for my father and myself. Deep in my heart, I know the day is coming when holy Ilium will be destroyed, with Priam and the people of Priam, of the god Ashen Spear. Yet I am not so much distressed by the thought of what the Trojans will suffer, or Hecuba herself, or King Priam, or all my gallant brothers whom the enemy will fling down in the dust, as by the thought of you, dragged off in tears by some Achaean man at arms to slavery. I see you there in Argos, toiling for some other woman in the loom, or carrying water from an alien well, a helpless drudge with no will of your own. There goes the wife of Hector, they will say when they see your tears. He was the champion of the horse-taming Trojans when Ilium was besieged, and every time they say it, you will hear another pang at the loss of the one man who might have kept you free. Ah, may the earth lie deep on my dead body before I hear the screams you utter as they drag you off.
As he finished, glorious Hector held out his arms to take his boy, but the child shrank back with a cry to the bosom of the girdled nurse, alarmed by his father's appearance. He was frightened by the bronze of the helmet and the horsehair plume that he saw, nodding grimly down at him. His father and lady mother had to laugh, but noble Hector quickly took his helmet off and put the dazzling thing on the ground. Then he kissed his son, dandling him in his arms, and prayed to Zeus and the other gods.
Zeus and you other gods, grant that this boy of mine may be, like me, preeminent in Troy, as strong and brave as I, a mighty king of Ilium. May people say, when he comes back from battle, here is a better man than his father. Let him bring home the blood-stained armor of the enemy he has killed, and make his mother happy.
Hector handed the boy to his wife, who took him to her fragrant breast. She was smiling through her tears, and when her husband saw this, he was moved. He stroked her with his hand and said,
My dear, I beg you to not be too much distressed. No one is going to send me down to Hades before my proper time. But fate is a thing that no man born of woman, coward, or hero can escape. Go home now and attend to your own work, the loom and the spindle, and see that the maidservants get on with theirs. War is men's business, and this war is the business of every man in Ilium, and myself above all.
As he spoke, glorious Hector picked up his helmet with its horsehair plume, and his wife set out for home, shedding great tears, and with many a backward look. She soon got home, and there in the palace of Hector, killer of men, she found a number of her women servants, and stirred them all to lamentation. So they mourned for Hector in his own house, though he was still alive, thinking that he would never survive the violence and fury of the Achaeans and come home from the battlefield. Paris had also been quick, and had not lingered in his lofty house. Directly he had put on his splendid armor with its trappings of bronze, he hurried off through the town at full speed, like a stallion who breaks his halter at the manger where they keep and fatten him, and gallops off across the fields in triumph to his usual bathing place in the delightful river. He tosses his head up, his mane flies back along his shoulders. He knows how beautiful he is, and away he goes, skimming the ground with his feet to the haunts and pastures of the mares. So Paris, Priam's son, came down hot-foot from the citadel of Pergamus, resplendent in his armor like the dazzling sun, and laughing as he came. He soon caught up his noble brother Hector, just as he was leaving the spot where he had talked with his wife. Before Hector could speak, Prince Paris began to excuse himself.
My dear brother,
he said,
I am afraid I have been too leisurely and kept you waiting when you wanted to be off. I have not been as punctual as you wished.
Sir,
said Hector of the glittering helmet,
no reasonable man could make light of your achievements in battle. You have plenty of courage, but you are too ready to give up when it suits you, and refuse to fight. And I find it mortifying to hear you abused by the Trojans, whom you yourself have brought to this pass. But let us be off. Later I will make up for anything I may have said, if Zeus ever lets us drive Achaeans from our soil, and celebrate our deliverance with drink offerings in the palace to the everlasting gods of heaven.